Welcome back to Grit Gym, guys. I've got Micheal Boyle with me today. Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning. I think it's fair to say, like, probably legendary status in the strength and conditioning world at this point. The biggest guest that we've had on the Grit Gym show so far. So I'm really excited to sit down and talk with him. And I really got to kind of like check my ego a little bit because I'm gonna try to disagree with the Micheal Boyle about Olympic lifting in a discussion that we're going to have here in a second. But Coach, for me, I don't think you really need a ton of introduction, just because like you've been such a you have such a following, and you've been so good for the strength and conditioning community. But can you kind of tell people a little bit about what you do and how you got started?
Yeah, because I think you'd said this is probably 90% more general population folks. So if we were going out to strength coaches, I might at least assume that some of them know who I am, but I would say most of these people have no idea and are looking and saying, who is this old guy here? So yes. I am 58 years old. I have been doing this for, I can't even, I guess I'm pushing on 40 years now. I'm probably 36 years of actually coaching people. I started when I was 21 at Boston University. I started in strength and conditioning when strength and conditioning didn't exist, really. I started in personal training when personal training didn't exist, really. So I've been doing this stuff really before most people thought about it, even as the fact that you could make money at it. And when I started, I didn't make any money at it. It was
10 years ago doing this. It wasn't a thing. It was barely a thing. Yeah.
36 years ago when I started, I still remember I had two friends from Springfield College who got part-time strength and conditioning jobs.
Right.
And I thought, wow, these guys, my two friends went on to become the two longest tenured strength coaches in the National Football League, Mike Woysick and Rusty Jones. But at the time we were leaving Springfield College, they had both gotten kind of dual role jobs where they had to do something else while they were the strength coach. But I thought that was the coolest thing ever. It was someone was actually getting paid to do this.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's amazing. So yeah, like you did, like you guys are definitely like pioneers in the. I guess you call it an industry at this point, but what was it like back then versus what is it like now?
Well, I mean, it's funny. Someone asked me, sort of what do you remember as the greatest technological development? And I'm like, the computer. So I mean, when we started out doing it, the computer room was probably about as big as the room that you're in.
Yeah.
And we were punching holes in cards to run them through a computer to analyze data or something like that. So the thought that we could sit here and that I could talk to you, we had to read books. We had to go to a library and look at what they called microfiche at that time. So you'd kind of go and look at these little reels of microfilm that might have video. I remember looking for Olympic lifting video and going on and having to go and look at these, microfiche and put it in these readers and watch it. So, I mean, it was so completely and utterly different from the way it is now in terms of there were no 20-year-old experts. At least if they were, we didn't know they were there because they weren't bothering us from someplace else because we couldn't see them. And if anybody had done anything of consequence, it probably meant that they had written a book. And now I realize even in the process of writing a book, books, I would say books by the time you get them are at least 2 or 3 years out of date. And so God knows what sort of information we were working off of at that time. The best source of information were muscle magazines, things like Muscle and Fitness, Strength and Health, Ironman. That was where you were getting relatively real-time information. And those were probably the big drivers in the field at that time.
Yeah. And I mean, and now we consider those like by the time they might, they're out of date by the time they get to you because the internet's just
right. And the fact that now, I mean, who bothers to actually read a magazine? I don't know. I think there are not a whole lot of people. I still am a book reader. I will definitely read books, but it would be rare that I would read a magazine unless I was sort of stuck in a waiting room or on an airplane or something like that. But
yeah, like you might look at the pictures, but I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, I don't know about you, but like reading off of a tablet or reading off a computer, like it just bugs me. Like I like to have a page,
Mm-hmm.
Plus I just sit there and scribble on.
Yeah, well, that's kind of old age, just so you know, because my son watches TV on his phone as opposed to watching. We have a 50-inch TV, and he sits there like this with his phone and looks at his phone, which I consider to be the most bizarre behavior possible.
Yeah. I think that's where it's going though. Like what happens when it's just
Oh yeah, with no question. I mean, that's why we're doing this stuff, and that's why when I get the opportunity to do this stuff, I do, because this is absolutely where it's going. And if you can't, I was having this conversation with actually with my son's lacrosse coaches, because they're really good lacrosse coaches. They've got a nice little select lacrosse program going, but their social media footprint is horrible in terms of they had like an Instagram account with 300 followers that they haven't posted on in a month. And they had a Facebook page, same thing, that they hadn't posted on since November.
Yeah.
And I was trying to explain to them that, guys, this is your outreach. This is your advertising. This is your vehicle to get to clients. And I think people in their 40s and 50s, if they're not really good about studying, can really get lost. All of a sudden you're lost in the wilderness. You don't have any way to contact customers, any way to advertise, because you're not internet savvy.
Yeah. Yeah. And besides, even if you can look at it at that point, and you can also, we were talking about this the other day in the gym with a bunch of people, because I try to hit the social media thing hard, but mine comes from almost like a point of like idealism. Like this is your ability to put a good message out, put good information out and give something back,
Yeah. But the reality is it's not. It is your advertising vehicle. It's the only thing that you have right now. When you think, imagine if I said, Adam, gee, I want you to run some ads in the local paper. You'd laugh.
Yeah.
You just laugh, right? You just be like, that's absurd. Why would I do that? But think about how people used to try to get customers.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody, like the paper's dying. Like you just said, nobody reads magazines, unless you have some kind of presence on the internet, it's probably not going to be a thing.
Yeah.
And if you're not putting out a good message, like even if you're putting out a bad message, some people are getting attention. So it's like, if no one's willing to go ahead and step up, that has educated themselves and continues to learn and continues to think of new, innovative kind of ways to make it better, then what's going to end up,
Well, it's the same progression if you really look at it. I use like professional wrestling as a perfect example in terms of professional wrestling is really big on television. There's lots of people that watch it, yet we all know that it's fake and that it's kind of an odd product, but it has a huge following. The internet, the big superstars on the internet, on Instagram, the big superstars on YouTube are not people like us. They're not people who know anything about fitness. They're people with abs who make videos of themselves doing ridiculous things, but they're the ones that are making millions and getting product placement and generating all these hits and likes and all that stuff. And it's a bunch of idiots like us. We're sort of playing in the shallow end of the pool somewhere without a lot of knowledge, but realizing, we have to be in here. Like, I got to kind of be in the water. And there's some other guy like out in a yacht out there who's saying, oh yeah, I'm 25 years old. And I got 20 million followers because I'm ripped. Yeah. So I think the reality of it doesn't change just the vehicle.
Yeah, I do too. And I don't have anything against that kid that's able to pull that off. It's just kind of an interesting thing.
I do. I have something against him, but it's okay.
Oh, yeah. So with Olympic lifting, we said we were going to talk about Olympic lifting. You kind of brought up when you were learning about Olympic lifting, the biggest educational thing that you had was what would you call them? The fish? Like what kind of film? The fish film? Is that
microfiche? F-I-C-H-E, microfiche. They were like little films. I don't know. They had these little readers in the library. I guess the closest thing would be sort of like a reel-to-reel tape.
Yeah.
But they weren't really like that. They were little. They were smaller than that, and you kind of they had little readers that you put them in. And
versus clicking a button on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so like back then, I was in college in what was that? Oh my God, it's been a little while now. Like 11 years ago, I'm graduated college. We're still doing all sorts of Olympic lifts along the way. We're seeing a ton of Olympic lifting done in strength conditioning. Is there kind of in where you are with all the studying that you've done, have you come to a conclusion that Olympic lifting should be used across the board, or for every single person, or that there are certain people that it is inappropriate for and people that it is appropriate for?
Well, it's interesting because, and you said, so 90% of the people that are viewing are normal adults, then 90% of the people that are viewing shouldn't be doing Olympic lifting. So I look at it and think, I'm sort of completely kind of anti the whole CrossFit idea. I don't think that adults, and I've written this, adults make very bad Olympic lifters. People that have been sitting down for a really long time and can't reach their hands up over their head are going to be terrible Olympic weightlifters. Right. As a result, our adult population, our general population stuff is zero Olympic weightlifting. No, I wouldn't say zero, maybe 2%, because we do have some, this small number of ex-jocks who are really like, hey, I really want to do cleans. And
so they grew up doing it probably. I mean, they probably have a mass. Like I've done a ton of Olympic lifting. I would have no problem throwing off a snatch right now. And I'm almost 33 years old. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. But to a 55-year-old mom who's never lifted a day in her life.
Yeah, it's stupid. I mean, I wouldn't even consider it. Yet, on the flip side, I consider it absolutely vital. Not vital, but I think it's one of the best things a young athlete can do. I think it's, when we start with kids, it's one of the first things that we teach them, because I do think it's really athletic and really coordinative. There's so much value to it for a young developing athlete. So I guess I have almost completely divergent opinions. On one hand, I've got this, hey, never with adults. And on the other hand, I would say absolutely always with kids. So I think that's the continuum.
So when you get an athlete in, let's say they don't have the shoulder flexion to pull it off, they've got, they're stuck and they can't extend their upper back because of strength, mobility restriction, whatever it is. I don't know, and they don't have like a decent amount of foundational strength to actually get anything out of it. Are you working towards that, or are you just throwing them in?
We're working toward, well, generally what we do is we start with hang cleans with everybody, which I think is an easier lift for everybody to learn. So you don't have to worry about overhead mobility. So you don't have to, we're not doing bar snatches. We're not doing push jerks. So we start, and then our introduction to overhead work will usually be dumbbell snatch, which I always think gives you a lot more degrees of freedom. So somebody can kind of figure a way to weasel their way into a dumbbell snatch position a lot easier than they could with a bar snatch. And then if we get to bar snatch down the road and they can't do it, we don't. So I think there is a process that allows us to get there that really centers around learning to hang clean.
Yeah. And when you talk about Olympic lifting, are you talking just barbell snatch, barbell jerk, barbell clean from the floor, or are you putting hang cleans, kettlebell clean, like a one dumbbell jerk, one dumbbell snatch? Are you putting all of them in that category?
It's interesting for us, not really, in the sense that we never Olympic lift off the floor. I'm not a fan of Olympic lifting from the floor, and I've always argued with people in terms of the disc is a constant. So if you go to the floor, everybody is forced to lift from a certain height off the floor, which doesn't make sense. It doesn't work well. It only works well for shorter people.
Right.
So we've always been hang clean above the knee people, hang snatch above the knee people. We only close grip snatch. We do not snatch grip snatch. We don't overhead squat. And really, we don't jerk at all. We don't do any variations of push jerks, because I found, at least even with my athletes when I started, my athletes could generate too much lower body power and get far more weight over their head than I ever wanted them to be able to. And as a result, they couldn't get it down again. So we would get some guys, back in our football days, that could really jerk.
Yeah.
And then it would be just scary watching them try to get the bar back down somewhere.
Yeah, like when I was in college, we would just walk out from underneath it. And I mean, you got about college kids. I mean, 10% of them were probably sitting there lifting drunk. And it's just, you might have 300 pounds up above your head. Yeah, I remember I cleaned, it wasn't like an insane number. I think it was 275. It was enough to be scary, right? I cleaned 275, and my foot hit a puddle, like a little bit of sweat on the floor, slipped out, and the whole thing came on me. And I mean, like, granted, all I did was hit the floor because the plate stopped it, but it was terrifying.
Oh yeah, we've had, when I was a college strength coach, we had unfortunately too many of those where, guys going over backwards, and that's why. And so as a result, I sort of, it's like we have this little sphere of Olympic lifting that we kind of believe in, and it's really, the classically trained Olympic lifter would not like what we're doing. We do single leg cleans when we have people that are hurt, which drives the Olympic lifting people nuts. And we've done single leg bar snatches. So I think sometimes, we've extended our philosophy into our Olympic lifting too. So I think my thing is always to use the tool in the safest way possible in terms of, I always use the chainsaw analogy. If we're going to use a chainsaw, I want the chainsaw to be used for the right job and to be used really safely. Whereas if I look at the CrossFitter, it's like clean is their chainsaw, and they're going to give the chainsaw to children, moms, grandmother, doesn't matter who it is, just,
Yeah. And they're going to get them really tired before they give them that chainsaw.
Yes. Or get them really tired while they have it. Like, just keep swinging that thing around. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You've got two legs.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Like I think people are very romantic about this style of lifting, this like Olympic lifting, sort of thing that, well, it has to be the traditional, I don't know if romance is the right word, but it's like they just want to cling to it so bad that you always have to take a power clean from the floor instead of a hang clean. You're missing out on.
That's where you think that maybe dogmatic is a better word than romantic.
Yeah.
But I
Thank
think
you.
that's our field, because that's back squat. That's it. Most people are very invested in whatever they like. I always use the same absurd analogy when I talk. I tell people that I really like Bud Light and chocolate chip ice cream. But if people ask me for nutrition advice, I do not look at them and say Bud Light and chocolate chip ice cream.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay.
But in our field, that's what people do, in terms of people are very invested in what they do. Yeah. And as a result, they just tell everybody, oh, do what I do, without any regard for whether or not that's appropriate for them. And then they make up excuses about, well, you should be able to do this, or if you really practice, or if you really do this, or if you really do that, instead of just looking like, my pet peeve is that I try to stay out of the internet debates, but whenever anybody writes there are no bad lifts. Yes, there are, actually. There's a bunch of really bad lifts. I would tell you that behind the neck presses are bad. Dips are bad. Back squats are bad. Like, there are lifts that I just don't think are good choices for anybody.
Yeah, they're injury one
the group. Yeah. And that's, so I think it's the same thing. And then people, if the right person doing it the right way, I'm like, yeah, that's absolutely true. But that does not make the lift good if 1% or 2% or 10% of the people.
About an outlier at that point. And like, if you're applying your program across, for an outlier, then you just left off this entire demographic of people, and you get a bunch of people hurt.
And that's where the 80-20 principle is a really good thing. And you start looking at that and realizing that if sort of your exception is in the 20, you're okay. If your exception is in the 80, then you're probably doing the wrong things.
Yeah. And that's one of our things too. Like, when I was going along with this, like we used to do Olympic lifts with with all the athletes that I was working with 10 years ago. It was like we were working towards doing Olympic lifting, and all the general population people I had, we're working towards Olympic lifting. And then I was beating my head against the wall trying to get, the learning curve was so long, and the fact they probably did, like, looking back, I was just making a lot of mistakes, but I was learning. And they didn't have the foundational strength. They didn't have the mobility. They didn't have like almost everybody didn't have something that would make them a good Olympic lifter. So we started doing things like just jumping with the barbell in their hands, from a hang position, instead of a full on snatch or clean.
Yeah. I mean, we just went with our adults. We just jump. We don't have anything in their hands. And everybody does plyos. Everybody jumps. Everybody hops. Everybody bounds. We do a lot of medicine ball throwing. I think there's ways to get your velocity training. If you say, I want to do high velocity training, I want to train somebody's nervous system, there's a bunch of ways to do it. If you said to me, what's the best way, given all of these things being equal, somebody with the, sort of the right joints and the right mobility, all that, I'd say Olympic lifting. But if you said to me, analyze the risk benefit of that, I'd be like, well, it depends. How old are you? Do you have to go to work? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's things when you've got young people with no jobs, if they get hurt lifting, it's not as big a crisis as when you have like an older person who has to go to work and suddenly they're laying on your floor with a back spasm, or they've hurt their wrist, or they've hurt their shoulder. And you're thinking, gee, this really sucks. You can't go to work today. You might get fired. Your family might lose their job, their house. You might not eat. There's a lot of reality to adulthood.
Like 2 to 3 months, whereas the kid is going to be feel a little banged up for 3 days.
Right. And that's, I have a 18-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old son. And I've seen it myself in terms of kids. My son will be complaining about something. And 2 hours later, how's your shoulder? How's your elbow? Oh, it's good. It's fine. And I look at him and think, if I did what you did, I'd be hurt forever.
Yeah.
So
yeah. We see some of our we do a lot of lateral lunges in here, and for some of our high school kids, especially, we'll weight it up. And I see some of the girls go down to just all the way down their heel. They got that real shallow hip socket that they can do that. And I'm just like, my femur would be over there. Like my hip would be busted in half if I tried to do that.
I mean, it's just, and that I use the analogy of beef jerky and filet mignon for people all the time. When people say, why don't you do it? I said, just so that you understand, I said, those kids over there, that's filet mignon. This guy sitting here, this is beef jerky. If I showed you the two, do you see the difference? One is really crusty and hard and dehydrated, and one is really supple and really well hydrated. And you couldn't pull it apart if you wanted to. If I gave you uncooked filet and said, rip it apart with your hands, no chance. I give you beef jerky, you're like, you want a piece? Here.
Yeah.
And that really is the aging process in a very sort of microcosmic analogy.
Yeah.
I'll end up jerky.
I might have to steal that one from you. I've probably heard that like a dozen times, and I'm like this.
Yeah, just try to give me credit once. The first time you do it, and then after that, you can say it was your.
Yeah. You're just a one time. Okay, I can deal with that. But with Olympic lifting, if you want to go towards talking about, we have a thoracic mobility or a thoracic stability or even a strength restriction or an elbow wrist or that kind of thing. Like, do you have any trouble with the compression down here or the wrist flopping over or the valgus stress of the snatch?
I would say we don't get the valgus stretch because we close grip snatch. So we go straight over. Yeah. So that never becomes a problem. I think the biggest thing that we do see is that that upper body flexibility component, an upper body mobility component, whether it's T-spine, whether it's shoulder, whether it's wrist, whether it's elbow. But in all honesty, I would say that might be less than 5% of the athletes that we see, and that we kind of get past that relatively quickly. It actually becomes really rare that I think we get a kid and say, yeah, this kid really isn't going to be able to do this. And a lot of times, if they don't have that kind of wrist shoulder flexibility, a lot of times they do end up being able to close grip snatch or dumbbell snatch, and they're fine. So there's always kind of quick defaults. And the way our system is set up, it's very much sort of progression, regression based. And okay, if you can't do this, then you do this. Right. And there are people, like we've been playing around lately because I have professional baseball players with trap bar jumps and dumbbell jumps, things that I didn't do before. I'm starting to say, okay, I still would like to do. I look at this, so I would create the category in my mind is loaded power.
Sure.
And how am I going to do, like if I look at jumping, plyometrics, whatever we want to call it, as body weight power or unloaded power, what does loaded power look like for someone who can't Olympic lift? And that's, so maybe it is, we've been playing around with our just jump, our jump mat with dumbbell jumps and trap bar jumps, and trying to look and figure out kind of where's the sweet spot for those lifts in terms of power production. So that's kind of my new area of thought.
Yeah. No, we almost use that exclusively, but I think, I don't know where it ends for me, like where it begins, where it ends for me on power development versus just someone's ability to pick it up. Like if, for me, I want to be able to teach an exercise in under 60 seconds, or I want them to be able to understand the exercise and perform it in under 60 seconds if I'm explaining it. So so that they can feel, like I don't want to sit there and have to coach it for a half an hour and then be like, oh, okay, well, now try,
And I think that's what we do. Like we have our Olympic lifting progression kind of broken down that way, where we feel like we should realistically, you should be able to get the average kid doing something that looks like a hang clean the first day you see them in 10 minutes. That's our goal. If you can have something like, and I always say the objective, something that looks like a clean, we'll be okay. And then we're going to do that twice a week for 10 weeks. Usually if we have a kid, we're going to have that little 10-minute block. And I do think, much like whatever, other things that people rely, agility ladder work, there are things that are good for kids that maybe other people look and say, oh, that's not good for athletes. That's not. But when you're looking at kids who lack basic coordinative function, like I love the idea of Olympic lifting. It's like jump up, sit down, jump up, go down. There's a lot of stuff going on in Olympic lifting, and I feel like it's all good. And we're teaching. I mean, we have some kids. We always, I think motor moron is maybe not the nicest term, but we have some kids that fall in that category. I would say kids with questionable nervous systems. How's that? And we get those kids for Olympic lift. Sometimes there are some of these kids that who start out in the beginning, you think, oh my God, this will never happen. And it always happens.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's the thing. That's the weird thing about strength conditioning. It's just like when you get these kids that just seem like, oh, this kid will never, and he starts lifting and they just transform in front of your eyes. It's insane.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I said I pulled out some stuff, but George Carvajal, who's a guy that I follow on Twitter, who's a pretty good coach down in Florida. One of the things that he said the other day was, and I'm going to read it for you. He said, for years, I didn't Olympic lift my athletes because of the time it takes to teach the proper Olympic mechanics, especially in the short NFL offseason. Then I realized that's exactly what my job is, to teach them properly in that window. And I was that way about deadlifts. For a long time, we didn't deadlift. And I'd always say, well, people just don't deadlift right, so I don't like deadlifts. And then one day, I was reading this article by Barry Ross, who's Allison Felix's coach, if you follow Olympic sprinting. And one of the things that Barry Ross said was that deadlifting is better for you than squatting because deadlifting involves far more musculature. When you start looking at like grip musculature, upper back musculature. And I remember reading it thinking, darn, he's right. And I really don't like everybody doing deadlifts, but he's pretty right.
Yeah, as long as you can hinge back into it.
Right. Yeah, then we went back to trap bar, where you don't really have to hinge.
Right.
With trap bar, like I looked at trap bar and said, you can basically trap bar squat.
Yeah.
And from a mechanical standpoint.
Forgiveness. Your knee can slide forward. Just that sometimes that half inch to 2 inches is like, it's just like a godsend to a person's low back that was just going to.
But yet you get the grip and the upper back benefit. And suddenly I was forced to accept a lift that for years I had said, we're not going to do that because when people do it, it's always ugly. And then I thought, well, it's always ugly because I let it be ugly. It's always ugly because I don't mandate that it's not going to be ugly. I don't mandate that from start to finish, you have to be a good deadlifter. And if I let you kind of break form on the first lift and slam the plates off the ground and bounce it back up again with around your back, that's my fault.
Yeah.
That's not the deadlift's fault. So I think we started to look at more things that way in terms of, okay, that's, some people might say that, well, that means there's no bad lifts. And I'm like, no, there are other lifts that I might look at and think, I don't like barbell. We do no barbell deadlifts, zero.
Yeah. I think that just
because as you said,
you're analyzing the pros and cons of the scenario,
right. And you realize that barbell, people always say, oh, barbell deadlifting, it's like the CrossFit thing. Oh, you got to wear high socks because you tear up your shins. And I'm like, or you could just buy a trap bar. And then you could wear normal person socks and not worry about bleeding all over the gym. It's absolutely your choice.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think we haven't. I used to try to just beat my head against the wall trying to teach people how to conventional deadlift with a barbell, and now we're just basically exclusive. If you're going to go with your feet narrow, we're going exclusive with the trap bar, and we almost never go beyond sumo with a barbell.
Yeah, we go sumo kettlebell to teach everybody in the beginning. Everybody kettlebell deadlifts, and our rule is basically don't give them the trap bar until they can kettlebell deadlift the heaviest kettlebell. And we just kept buying heavier kettlebells. Like I don't even know what we have. We've got over 100-pound kettlebells. So by the time someone gets to deadlift, it's not a huge transition for them to be able to do that. And so I think there's a lot of just common sense.
Yeah, I really like adding the second kettlebell in there too. When you go, like if you only have kettlebells up to 24 kilograms, let's say, and you're going to buy that 32, so you go to buy a 32, they max out on 32. Well, then go back down to the 24, hit that for 48. There's something different about having two kettlebells in your hands. Yeah.
Oh, there is. I think it's a lot. It creates people have to get a little bit wider. They have to be maybe a little more squat stance, and I like that because I was a sumo deadlifter. I was never a good conventional deadlifter, so I was always drawn to sumo deadlifting because I could always squat more than I could deadlift, and if I went to conventional deadlift, it was well below my squat.
Well, yeah, some people just don't have the angle. I don't want to blame anything on genetics. I don't like it when people do that, when they're like, oh, it must be their genetics that they're fat, or it must be your genetics that you're weak, or whatever. I just think that's ridiculous. But if you do have that, if you have a certain type of pelvis or you have a really long femur, it's going to be hard you're almost going to have to lift that bar out around your knee or stick your butt up in the air to be able to deadlift that up from conventional.
Right. And I said there may be a difference between genetics and anthropometrics in terms of, I have a really good slide that I use in my presentations of two girls that trained at our gym who I have a picture of them both sitting down. So they're both sitting on 12-inch boxes. They're the same height.
Yeah.
Stand up. One of them is a foot taller than the other when they stand up. And just to show people, look at the spines are identical length. Yeah. The difference is primarily almost exclusively in femurs. Yeah. Although there are 12 inches difference between the two of them, between tibia and femur. In one case, it's about 3 inches of tibia and about 9 inches of femur.
Is it really? Wow. That's quite a difference.
Yeah. 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 I mean, literally like 5'11" and 5'1".
Yeah, we always joke in here. Rachel, my significant other, she's 6 foot tall. I'm 6'4", but our hips are about this far apart. Like, I mean, she's probably not even an inch. If you go right off of that ischial crest, we're just almost the same. It's kind of amazing. So, like, just that genetic variance from person to person, it just gives more credence to the trap bar versus the barbell on a deadlift.
And even why, like I use it also, it's why some people shouldn't squat. I mean, it's why some basketball players, some offensive linemen, you get some people who just are not good squatters. Yeah. And I always say you're never going to make them. If they've got that super long femur, you'll never make that person a good squatter. You can try, but they'll never be as good. I have my standard jokes. You know, what does someone who wants you to squat usually look like? And the answer is squatty. You know, if you then they would be squatty, like, oh yeah, he's a squatty person. Yeah, and he's the one who's always telling you that everybody should squat. And you're like, yeah, that's because you're squatty.
Yeah, like he's a squatter.
Yeah, yeah. Like, yeah, if you're a lanky, the lanky guy never argues with you about squatting. He never says, oh, why can't we back squat? Right? Never.
Yeah. There you go. Well, Coach, this is like incredible to have you on. I gotta get going here in just a second because I got clients coming in. But is there anything else before we sign off? This has been fantastic. Thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to kind of leave the Grit Gym crowd with before we jet out?
Yeah, I think I'll leave you with two thoughts at least. The Grit Gym crowd, your people, that 90%. One, I always talk about. I wrote an article one time called "Only One Body." And the reality is, I use the analogy of a car. I said, if you're 16 and your parents gave you a car and said, Adam, this is it. This is the car, and you only get one car your whole life, you'd be really, really good to that car. Yeah. Yet people don't do that with their body. They don't look at it and think, wow, this is it. People think the parts are interchangeable. Oh, I'll just go get a new knee. I'll just go get a new hip. Whenever I have anybody say, I'm going to have my knee replaced, I tell them, do you realize they're going to cut your leg off in 2 places, right? Did they explain that part to you before? And so I think that's a really big piece. And the other thing, I wrote another article called Does It Hurt? And I always say to everybody, if I ask you, does something hurt, you can only answer yes or no. So training is so simple. Can someone do that exercise? I got to know, have them do it. Then ask them, does that hurt? And if it doesn't, then they can do that exercise. If they say anything besides no, that's yes. When they say stuff like, oh, it's not bad, or it's okay, or after I warm up, I'm like, those are all yeses. And in the adult fitness world, we have to get good at looking. I should know who the is from, but it says, what you do speaks so loudly I can't hear what you say. So I have to look at people all the time and say, I tell our coaches, watch the clients. The client that's walking around rubbing their shoulder or rubbing their neck or rubbing their back is lying to you about how that lift is reacting with their body.
They're lying.
So that would be the stuff.
Yeah. What's that? Sorry, I missed the last part there.
I said that's the stuff that I'd leave you with.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mike. I completely agree. Like people, I think like you've been conditioned your whole life to be like, oh no, I'm tough.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's not tough. That's just stupid. I've towed that line between tough and stupid for a lot of years. I know what it ends up with. It ends up with a hip. It ends up with a knee. It ends up with a foot where I couldn't walk for a year. You know, it ends up with a shoulder. It's no fun. Yeah. And
Exactly.
if you're in this thing, you're in it for health. I think that's what you're saying with the car analogy, right?
Yeah, that's exactly. Is that our job is to make people feel better. It's really not to make them at this stage in your adult groups. It's not about getting bigger or stronger or faster. It's about feeling better. It's about living a longer, better life.
Yeah.
Not my friend Ben Bruno wrote his 10 Commandments the other day. If you look on Instagram, it's pretty funny. One of the things he said, like, no one cares how much you bench.
Yeah.
So just do it right.
Yeah.
You know, I would say, if you go to a party and you talk to people about how much you lift, you're a loser.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, that's the reality. Like, no one cares.
Yeah. No one's inviting you back the next time. Yeah. Wow. All right, Mike. Well, thanks for being on here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
This was fantastic. But guys, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Please click the like button and the share button. Send this out to everybody you know. This is fantastic. This is free information that is seriously priceless. So please share it out to everybody you know. Thanks for being here, Coach. I really appreciate it.
All right, no problem. I'm going to click stop and I'll be out of here. See ya.
See ya.